Napoleon did not march into Russia by accident. He was not reckless. He was not unprepared. He made a decision that looked logical, a decision that felt necessary, a decision that made turning back impossible. By the time Napoleon realized what it would cost, the army was already moving east, and history had already closed the door behind him. To understand why Napoleon marched into Russia, you must first understand what Napoleon had become. By 1811, Napoleon Bonaparte controlled most of Europe. France, of course, but also Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, parts of Germany, Poland. His brothers sat on thrones in Naples and Spain. His marshals governed occupied territories. Kings sent him letters addressing him as equal or superior. He had risen from nothing, the son of minor Corsican nobility, an artillery officer who seized power during chaos, a man who crowned himself emperor in 1804, with the Pope watching, and he had done it through brilliance, not luck, not birthright, brilliance. Napoleon understood warfare better than anyone alive. He moved faster than his enemies expected. He struck where they were weakest. He inspired loyalty in his soldiers not through fear, but through victory. They believed in him because he won, and he kept winning. At Austerlitz, he destroyed a combined Russian and Austrian army. At Jena, he shattered Prussia in a single day. At Wagram, he forced Austria to surrender. By 1811, only two major powers had not submitted to French dominance. Britain, protected by the sea and the greatest navy in the world, and Russia. Britain could not be invaded. Napoleon had tried. He assembled an army at Boulogne, prepared to cross the Channel, but he could not defeat the British fleet. So he changed strategies. If he could not invade Britain, he would strangle it economically. He created the continental system, a blockade. Every nation in Europe was forbidden from trading with Britain. No British goods, no British ships. The goal was simple: bankrupt Britain, force them to negotiate peace, and for a time it worked. British exports fell, factories closed, unemployment rose. The plan was succeeding, but it required total compliance. Every port had to be closed, every border had to be sealed, and Russia was not complying. Tsar Alexander I of Russia was Napoleon's ally, on paper. In 1807, after Napoleon defeated Russia at Friedland, the two emperors met at Tilsit. They signed a treaty, they embraced, they spoke of friendship and mutual interest. Napoleon thought he had secured Russia's cooperation, but alliances are fragile things, especially when they are built on defeat rather than trust. Russia agreed to join the continental system, to stop trading with Britain. But the Russian economy depended on that trade. Russian grain fed British cities. British manufactured goods filled Russian markets. Cutting off Britain hurt Russia as much as it hurt Britain. And by 1810, Tsar Alexander was ignoring the blockade. Quietly, subtly, Russian ports allowed neutral ships, ships that just happened to carry British goods. Tariffs were adjusted, loopholes were created. It was not open defiance, but it was defiance nonetheless. Napoleon knew, and he could not ignore it, because if Russia broke the continental system, others would follow. Austria might resume trade, Prussia might open its ports, the entire strategy would collapse, and Britain would survive. Napoleon sent diplomats. He demanded Russia honor the treaty. Alexander responded with vague assurances and no action. Napoleon increased pressure. He moved troops closer to the Russian border. He sent warnings. Still, Alexander did nothing, and Napoleon faced a choice. Accept that Russia was undermining him, or force compliance. Accepting it meant showing weakness, and weakness for Napoleon was unacceptable, not because of ego, because of survival. Napoleon's empire was held together by the perception of inevitability. As long as people believed he could not be defeated, they would not try. But the moment the belief cracked, everything would fall apart. Spain was already rebelling, a grinding, brutal insurgency that drained French resources. Austria was recovering, rebuilding its army. Prussia simmered with resentment. If Napoleon allowed Russia to defy him openly, every nation in Europe would take note, and they would start calculating whether they could do the same. So Napoleon did not see the invasion of Russia as a choice. He saw it as a necessity, not to conquer Russia, but to remind Europe that defiance had consequences. In early 1812, Napoleon begins preparing for war. He does not call it an invasion. He calls it a demonstration, a show of force. The goal is not to occupy Russia. The goal is to march deep enough to force Tsar Alexander to negotiate, to reaffirm the alliance, to close the ports. Napoleon believes this can be done quickly. One major battle, one decisive victory. Then Alexander will come to terms. That is how every other war has worked. Austerlitz. One battle, Austria surrendered. Jena. One battle, Prussia collapsed. Wagram. One battle, Austria sued for peace. Russia will be no different. Napoleon assembles the largest army Europe has ever seen, the Grand Army, 600,000 men, French soldiers, of course, but also Germans, Poles, Italians, Dutch, Swiss, Croats, soldiers from every corner of Napoleon's empire. Some march willingly, others are conscripted, but all march because Napoleon commands it. Logistics are planned meticulously. Supply depots are established along the route. Thousands of wagons carry food, ammunition, medical supplies. Engineers prepare pontoon bridges to cross rivers. Napoleon's staff calculates distances, march rates, consumption. Everything is accounted for on paper. But paper does not account for reality. Napoleon's marshals are uneasy. They do not say so openly, but in private conversations, doubts surface. Russia is not Austria, one says. The distances are too great, says another. But Napoleon dismisses their concerns. He has fought longer campaigns. He has marched farther. He has faced larger armies. And he has always won. Why would this be different? Besides, turning back now is impossible. The army is already assembled. The supplies are already positioned. Europe is watching. If Napoleon backs down, if he recalls the army without achieving anything, he will look weak. And weakness invites aggression. So on June 24th, 1812, the Grand Army crosses the Niemen River into Russia. There is no fanfare, no declaration of war, just the slow, steady movement of the largest military force ever assembled. Napoleon rides at the front, silent, focused. He is 42 years old, at the height of his power, and he believes fully that this will be over by autumn. The first weeks in Russia are strange. There is no battle. The Russian army retreats, not in panic, in discipline. They fall back, town by town, mile by mile. They do not engage. Napoleon's scouts report sightings of enemy forces. But every time the Grand Army advances, the Russians withdraw. Napoleon expects them to make a stand, to defend Moscow, to protect their heartland. But they do not, and this creates a problem. Napoleon's strategy depends on a decisive battle, a battle where he can destroy the Russian army, force Alexander to negotiate. But you cannot win a battle if the enemy refuses to fight. Napoleon pushes deeper into Russia. Vilna falls without resistance. Vitebsk is abandoned. Smolensk is taken after brief fighting, but the Russian army escapes. With every mile, the Grand Army stretches thinner. Supply lines grow longer. Soldiers begin to fall behind, not from combat, but from exhaustion, disease, desertion. Horses die from lack of forage. Wagons break down on rough roads. The army that crossed into Russia was 600,000 strong. By the time Napoleon reaches Smolensk, fewer than 200,000 remain in fighting condition. The rest are strung out across hundreds of miles, trying to keep up. Napoleon knows this. His officers report the losses. They suggest stopping, consolidating, wintering in Smolensk, and resuming the campaign in spring. Napoleon considers it. For a moment, but stopping means admitting the campaign has failed. It means spending the winter in hostile territory, vulnerable. It means giving Russia time to regroup, to call in reinforcements. And it means showing Europe that Napoleon can be stalled, that he is not invincible. So Napoleon makes a decision. He will not stop. He will continue to Moscow. The Russians will have to defend their capital, and when they do, he will defeat them. Then the war will end. This is the moment. This is the decision. Not the decision to invade, but the decision to keep going. The decision that makes turning back impossible. Because once Napoleon pushes past Smolensk, there is no safe retreat. The supply depots are behind him, already half empty. The roads are clogged with wounded and stragglers. Winter is approaching, and the only way out is forward. Napoleon does not see it as a gamble. He sees it as logic. The enemy is retreating. Moscow is within reach. Victory is possible, and stopping now guarantees failure. So he marches, and 600,000 men follow. For a time, the decision seems correct. On September 7th, 1812, the Russian army finally stops retreating. They make a stand at Borodino, 70 miles west of Moscow. 130,000 Russian soldiers, 130,000 French and Allied troops. It is the largest and bloodiest single day of the Napoleonic Wars. From dawn until nightfall, the armies tear each other apart. Artillery roars without pause. Infantry charges again and again into fortified positions. Cavalry smashes into infantry squares. By the end of the day, over 70,000 men are dead or wounded. The battlefield is carpeted with bodies. But the French hold the field. The Russians retreat. Napoleon has his victory. Not decisive, not complete, but a victory nonetheless. A week later, the Grand Army enters Moscow. The soldiers expect to find shelter, food, rest. They find an empty city. The Russian governor has ordered the evacuation. Most of the population is gone. And that night, fires begin. No one knows who starts them. Some say Russian saboteurs. Some say French looters. But the fires spread. For 5 days, Moscow burns. Entire neighborhoods are consumed. The wooden structures that make up most of the city turn to ash. By the time the fires die, 3/4 of Moscow is gone. Napoleon watches from the Kremlin. He had expected this city to be his bargaining chip. Now it is a ruin. But he still believes Alexander will negotiate. He sends envoys, letters, proposals for peace. He waits for a response. Days pass, weeks pass. No response comes. Because Tsar Alexander has made his own decision, he will not negotiate, not while French soldiers occupy Russian soil. Napoleon's officers grow anxious. We should leave, they say. Winter is coming. But Napoleon waits. He believes Alexander will crack, that the pressure of occupation will force him to the table. But Alexander does not crack, and the calendar does not stop. October arrives. Snow begins to fall, not heavily, but enough to remind everyone what is coming. Napoleon finally gives the order. The Grand Army will withdraw, not in defeat, in consolidation. They will return to winter quarters in friendly territory, regroup, resume the campaign in spring. It is a reasonable plan, but it is too late. The roads the army marched on in summer are now mud. The supply depots they passed are now empty. The villages they ignored are now burned. The Russian army, which retreated for months, now presses forward, not in pitched battles, but in raids, ambushes, harassment. Cossack cavalry strikes at stragglers, cuts off detachments, disappears before reinforcements arrive. The Grand Army begins to dissolve, not from combat, from cold, from hunger, from exhaustion. Soldiers abandon their weapons to move faster. Horses collapse and are butchered for food. Discipline breaks down. Officers lose control of their men. It becomes a retreat, then a rout, then a nightmare. At the Berezina River, the army tries to cross on makeshift bridges. Russian forces attack from both sides. Thousands drown. Thousands are captured. Thousands simply freeze. Napoleon keeps moving. He does not abandon his men, but he cannot save them. By December, the cold is unbearable, -30 degrees Celsius. Men freeze to death while walking. Frostbite claims fingers, toes, noses. The survivors stop burying the dead. There is no time, no strength. The bodies are left where they fall. On December 5th, Napoleon makes a final decision. He leaves the army, not in cowardice, but in necessity. News has reached him of a coup attempt in Paris, rumors of his death, political instability. If he does not return immediately, he may lose his throne. He entrusts command to Marshal Murat. Then he takes a small group and rides west in a sleigh. He travels in disguise, through hostile territory, across frozen rivers and snow-covered plains. And on December 18th, he arrives in Paris. The people are shocked to see him. They thought he was dead, or trapped in Russia. But here he is, alive, unbroken, at least in appearance. But the Grand Army is gone. 600,000 men marched into Russia. Fewer than 100,000 return. The rest are dead, captured, or missing. It is the greatest military disaster in history, and it began with a single decision. The decision to keep moving forward when stopping was still possible. The destruction of the Grand Army does not immediately end Napoleon's empire. He is still emperor. France is still powerful. But the illusion is shattered. For years, Europe believed Napoleon could not be defeated. Now they know he can, and they act. Prussia, humiliated and occupied since 1806, rises in rebellion. Austria, Napoleon's ally through marriage, switches sides. Sweden joins the coalition against France. Even the smaller German states begin to defect. Napoleon raises new armies. Conscripts mostly. Boys too young and men too old. He fights brilliantly. He wins battles at Lutzen, Bautzen, Dresden. But he cannot win the war, because the decision he made in 1812 destroyed more than an army. It destroyed his reputation. It destroyed the belief that he was invincible. And belief, in the end, was all that held his empire together. In 1813, at the Battle of Leipzig, the Battle of Nations, Napoleon is defeated by a combined force of Russian, Prussian, Austrian, and Swedish troops. He retreats to France. In 1814, Paris falls. Napoleon abdicates. He is exiled to Elba, a small island off the coast of Italy. He escapes a year later, returns to France, rebuilds an army, and marches to meet his enemies one final time at Waterloo. He loses. This time, there is no mercy. He is exiled to St. Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic. There, he will remain until his death in 1821. Alone, isolated, reflecting on what might have been. And perhaps, in those final years, he thinks about Russia, about the decision he made in 1812, the decision to keep marching, the decision that felt at the time like the only option. Napoleon Bonaparte did not lose in Russia because he was foolish. He lost because he was trapped. trapped by his own success, trapped by the expectations of an empire built on victory, trapped by the logic that stopping looked weaker than continuing. The decision to march past Smolensk was not madness, it was calculation, and for a time it seemed correct. But there are decisions in history that cannot be undone, moments when the only path forward leads to destruction, and yet stepping off that path feels impossible, because turning back means admitting failure, and failure for men like Napoleon is unthinkable until it is unavoidable. The invasion of Russia destroyed Napoleon's empire, but it did not destroy his legacy. We still remember him, not as a villain, not as a fool, but as a man who reshaped Europe, who rose from nothing and became everything, and who made one decision that he could not take back. History is full of such decisions, moments where logic and pressure and pride converge, where the choice feels obvious, necessary, inevitable, and only later, when the consequences unfold, does the trap become visible. Napoleon marched into Russia because not marching seemed more dangerous, and perhaps, in his position, with his pressures, with his empire watching. We might have marched too. This has been Echoes of Greatness.